Hello, I'm Letitia LaFollette, the president of the Archaeological Institute of America, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to today's Felicia A. Holton inaugural lecture with Dr. Peter Bogucki. Dr. Bogucki is this year's AIA Holton Book Award winner for his book, Meet the Barbarians. And we're delighted to actually inaugurate our first Holton lecture with him. I have a few announcements before we get started. The first one is that this lecture is being recorded by the AIA. It is a live presentation, and recording by attendees is strictly prohibited. The AIA respects the intellectual property of its presenters, and we ask that you, the viewers, do the same. Thank you very much for your cooperation. The second order of business is that we would like you to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen for the questions. We will do our best to answer as many questions as we can at the end of the lecture. So please be patient, but that is actually the best way for us to proceed. So I will now turn it over to our wonderful Vice President for Outreach and Education, Dr. Laura Rich, who will be introducing our speaker today.
Well, this is a treat. I have read the book and I can hardly wait to hear Dr. Bogucki's lecture today. He is the Associate Dean for Undergraduate Affairs at the School of Engineering and Applied Science at Princeton University, where he has executive oversight of advising and degree progress for over 1,300 candidates for the Bachelor of Science and Engineering degree, as well as being an archaeologist. He received his BA magna cum laude in anthropology from the University of Pennsylvania in 1974 and his PhD from Harvard in 1981. His main fields of study have been European prehistory and early farming societies in Europe, encompassing subsistence, settlement, and household studies, bioarchaeology, and zooarchaeology, and interactions between foragers, farmers, and borderlands. His work has focused on Eastern, Central, and Northwestern Europe, with major fieldwork at Neolithic sites in Poland. His recent research collaborations have been with Melanie Salk and Richard Evershed at the University of Bristol in 2010 to 2013 on analysis of ceramic sieves for milk lipid residues, and ongoing work since 2012 with Chelsea Budd and Rick Schulting at Oxford University on analysis of stable isotopes in human skeletons from Oswanki in Poland. Dr. Bogucki's edited volumes include Ancient Europe, an encyclopedia of the Barbarian World, 8000 BC to AD 1000 with Pam Crabtree in 2004. And his authored volumes include his 2017 The Barbarians, for which he has received the AIA's 2021 Felicia A. Holton Book Award. Since 1990, he has been a member of a team of authors directed by Paul Bond to contribute to collective works on archaeology, major titles including Archaeology, The Essential Guide to Our Human Past in 2017. Dr. Bogucki has also been an AIA lecturer, giving a Frederick R. and Margaret B. Madsen lecture and Robert Braidwood lecture in 2015-2016. I am so excited to present to you Dr. Peter Bogucki.
Many thanks to the Archaeological Institute of America and to Laura for her very, very kind introduction. It's been such an honor to receive the Holton Award and to be asked to give the inaugural Holton lecture. And then I must say that in the course of setting this up, it's been a great pleasure to work with the AIA on getting this together. My goal today is to talk about the non-literate peoples who live beyond the area known from classical authors and texts, as well as to situate them in a prehistoric past that has a time depth of many millennia. They didn't just show up when the classical authors started writing about them. So they get left out of many conceptions about the ancient world and many discussions of the ancient world, but they were there all along. And so I'm going to share my screen now. And there we are. And to illustrate this point, what I'd like to show you is a map that was the same map that Elizabeth Green showed several weeks ago in one of her excellent archaeology abridged talks. It's a map of the Roman Empire in the 1st century AD. But if you notice, I look at it from a somewhat different perspective, and that is that it's blank beyond the borders of the empire. There's rivers, there's some lakes, sea coasts, but it's blank. And, so you have to ask, is anyone out there? Of course, this blank area had been home to thriving societies that had been living there for thousands of years. And so we can call this the barbarian world. And I admit that using this map is a bit of a straw man, because the goal of the map is to show the Roman Empire. But on the other hand, the point is that there was lots more going on at the final centuries and even the final millennia before Christ and into the common era that are worth talking about in this huge expanse going from Ireland all the way across to the Eurasian steppes. And so this area of the barbarian world, including Gaul and Britain, which the Romans eventually conquered, and that part of Germania that they eventually conquered, corresponds to an area that we call temperate Europe. You might want to say that everything north of this line is what could be called temperate Europe, and south of it, you could say Mediterranean Europe, and then way to the north, you get sort of the boreal forests and tundra and northern Europe. But the key thing is that temperate Europe differs from the Mediterranean in several important ways. First of all, there's seasons, really dramatic differences in seasons with winters with cold and snow, particularly in the interior parts. And then you have serious mountains. You got the Alps, you have the Tatras, Carpathians, all these high mountain ranges, Pyrenees, that are dramatic addition to the topography, have snow on them, and you also have highland zones in the interior parts of Central Europe. So you have seasons and you have very, very different changes in topography there. And secondly, this area was covered mostly by forests. In fact, during prehistoric times, it was forested almost completely, right down to the seacoasts of the Baltic Sea that you see here, the North Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. So forests everywhere. And then there's wetlands all across Northern Europe with landscapes like this. So Tacitus had some not very kind things to say about this in his Germania. But if you take out the adjectives and just read the nouns, he pretty much has it. I mean, it's highly variable, but there's forests and there's wetlands everywhere. So I think that this is a key thing to understand about temperate Europe. And this is the world that the barbarians lived in. Now, a lot of this landscape was structured by the final ice sheets of the last glaciation, and you simply just didn't have that in the Mediterranean. Melting ice sheets really transform the Earth's surface. They leave hollows that are filled with lakes and swamps. The sea level rises, but then also land that was previously covered with ice also rebounds from the being relieved of the weight of the ice. It lays down different types of soils. You have glaciers in the mountains. You have the Baltic and North Seas themselves forming under these post-glacial conditions. So it's a very dynamic landscape over the past 10,000 years, and has a tremendous amount of variability in it. But wetlands are a big part of this whole thing, and mountains. So these are important aspects of the barbarian world. Let me just show you a brief timeline of the barbarian world. I'm not going to cover 10,000 years of prehistory in half an hour. My colleague Branko Glisic at Princeton calculated that at 5 years a second, and that's not going to work out too well. But just to show you that the time depth here that we're dealing with, the whole area is largely free of ice by about 10,000 years ago. Modern vegetation and basically modern climate becomes established, and the post-glacial hunter-gatherers colonize these newly ice-free zones there. Agriculture from the Near East appears in southeastern Europe about just after 7,000 years ago, and reaches the British Isles and Scandinavia by 4,000 BC. Now, in prehistoric time, that's actually very fast. It spread fairly dramatically across the continent, and so that's important to know. I put little mini Stonehenge in here just to show you that it falls into the third millennium BC, and that is just before you have the next major revolution, and that is the alloying of tin and copper to make bronze. Copper metallurgy begins in the Near East, in southeastern Europe, about 5,000 BC, and by 2000 BC, it's pretty well spread across temperate Europe there. So this allows people to have durable goods and elaboration of transportation networks. So you have large opportunities for the accumulation of wealth. Then getting down into the first millennium BC, you have the first impact of the Mediterranean world, and that is trade with Greeks fuels the rise of Iron Age elites in Central and Western Europe, and very dramatic developments happen there. Then Caesar conquered Gaul in the first century BC, and then eventually the porous frontier brings the barbarians in and brings Roman goods into the barbarian world, and by 476 AD, the whole Roman Empire has collapsed, and the barbarians win. So they're running the show, at least there. Let me put in a few iconic sites here to show you some visual cues of what was going on in the Mediterranean world, broadly conceived, so you can have some sense of the overall timeline. But rather than cover these 10,000 years, what I'd like to do is focus on several features of the barbarian world that I think makes them very if I want to say distinctive, but at least characterizes it in a way that gives you a sense of what was going on. So let's start with some obvious things. How about writing? No writing. That's what makes them barbarians. But there is a tremendously rich linguistic heritage, which then obviously comes to fruition in the first millennium AD, in very rich linguistic heritage in the Indo-European tradition, but also some unusual non-Indo-European languages like Basque persist in temperate Europe. So it's so even though there's no writing, clearly these folks had a very, very rich language history there. How about cities? Another important aspect. Well, no cities again in the barbarian world, but you did have these central places like hill forts and other enclosures, especially emerging in the Bronze Age and especially in the Iron Age in the second and first millennia BC. Now, there is a discussion whether or not the oppida that Caesar encountered in Gaul were urban in character, and archaeologists debate that point. But I think we can be certain that we did have these central places, but certainly not cities in the sense that you had in the Mediterranean world. So if you're only looking for writing and texts and cities, big urban agglomerations, then it's no wonder that barbarian world sometimes gets overlooked in these discussions. But there's a few other things that are very important. First of all these forests. You got to do something. The trees give you tremendous possibilities, and that is you can build settlements out of timber in just very elaborate ways. This is a replica of a longhouse from a Neolithic site in Poland. This is the sorts of sites that I study in my research, and it's it's kind of conjectural, the roof line and everything, but the walls are fairly accurate, and they were able to master the world of timber using stone tools and then eventually metal tools to do all sorts of things, not just houses, but also boats, and we'll see that in a second here, and other wooden objects there. So the megalithic tombs of Western and Northern Europe are kind of the exception to this, but even then, a site like Stonehenge is complemented by timber circles, timber henges at Durrington Walls and other nearby sites. Very early on, we see a very high level of personal mobility across the barbarian world. Watercraft. You can even talk about a watercraft revolution almost in the Neolithic and even the Mesolithic of Northern Europe, from hunter-gatherers onward, and the ability to cross bodies of water becomes even more developed in the Bronze Age and Iron Age. This is a replica of the Dover boat that was found at the entrance to the Channel Tunnel when it was being built in the 1990s. So the Viking boats of the first millennium AD, late first millennium AD, have very, very deep prehistoric roots, going back to this long tradition of watercraft across the barbarian world. So on land, there were elaborate networks of paths and trails connecting settlements. And we know that these folks moved around quite a bit because of strontium isotopes showing patterns of movement, of wide movement. Egvedgirl in Denmark, for example, traveled very, very widely. And now archaeogenetic data is revealing more evidence of movement. A very striking feature of the barbarian world is the attention paid to mortuary rituals, the positioning of the body, ornamentation, grave goods, and later burial mounds and chambers. So you have individual tumuli, you have cemeteries, you have settlement burials, you have cremations, you have skeletal burials, you have defleshing, you have post-mortem handling of bodies in all sorts of ways, you have contracted burials and extended burials, and even sitting burials like these Mesolithic burials in Brittany that are heavily ornamented with shell beads, with red deer antlers laid across the top of them, buried in a shell midden. But then this intentionality with mortuary practices runs throughout the barbarian world. The Iron Age bog bodies, for example, of Northern Europe, are examples of the ritual killing and intentional deposition of individuals. Now, through these attention paid to burial rituals, we really get a good glimpse of the spiritual lives of the barbarians. We also get a lot of information now through bioarchaeology using isotope analysis, archaeogenetics, and looking at the biomechanics of the bones about their lives that just simply wasn't available 30 years ago to us. That is the real research frontier where the really interesting things are starting to happen, I think, across the barbarian world is in the bioarchaeology of people, especially the ancient DNA. We also get occasional bursts of what you might call monumentality, exemplified by the megalithic monuments of Northern and Western Europe, where you did have a lot of large stones to use. Elsewhere, where you didn't have the large stones, earthen and mounds were used, sometimes with timber outlines and timber chambers inside of them. Some of these monuments were used for very short periods of time. Others were remodeled on various occasions. It's almost as if the process of building them was more important than their having an actual function, or their function didn't necessarily require the amount of effort put into building them over time. But they're very enigmatic, but we do see these episodes of monumentality, bursts of monumentality throughout the barbarian world, throughout all those millennia. Now, barbarians were exceptionally skilled at working all sorts of materials, including flint, bone, antler, fabrics, and eventually metals. Here's a few examples that are just classic ones. This is a flint dagger from Denmark, made around 1900 BC. So right at that transition between the Neolithic and the Bronze Age, and you can see that in the tool because the maker of this tool actually went to the effort to chip this line down the handle. And this is an imitation of the mold line that you find in metal forms like this further south in Central Europe, where they had already taken up the production of bronze and making these daggers out of bronze. So this maker imitated that in flint. And then you have the remarkable Glenishin gorget as an example of Irish Bronze Age gold work. This is these are just spectacular craftsman examples of skill in crafting gold and working gold and attaching different parts to each other with tiny little rivets and the filigree work on this. So this is from about 800 BC, and it was found by in the 1930s by a boy who was chasing a rabbit, and then the rabbit went down some cracks in the stone in Western Ireland, and he's reaching in trying to fish out the rabbit, grab the rabbit. Rabbit, of course, is long gone, but instead he pulls out this Gleninchine gorget. And there's a marker on the site today. There's like a little stone with says that this is where the Gleninchine gorget was found. It's behind a gate that says "Beware of bull," so you have to be a little bit careful, but you can actually connect with that find spot. And then finally, we have the woolen garments of Egtved girl, who is a Bronze Age young woman who died in the summer of 1370 BC and was buried in a coffin made out of a single oak trunk, and the seal was so tight that it preserved, and the burial also was somewhat waterlogged, and preserved the contents of the coffin remarkably, including this wool tunic and wool skirt, and so. She was about 16, but as I indicated earlier, the strontium isotope analysis suggests that she actually traveled at some point in her young life to southern Germany and then back to Denmark, and so she clearly was a very, very mobile individual. Just as an aside, I should say Denmark is a remarkable place for understanding the barbarian world, especially with the advent of metallurgy. In Denmark, you have perhaps the greatest concentration of bronze artifacts anywhere in the barbarian world. But the problem is there's no tin in Denmark and there's no copper. So a couple alternatives. Either you had to, obviously you had to get the copper and the tin from somewhere else. But the question is then, were the artifacts imported to Denmark as finished products from someplace else, or did those two raw materials get combined in Denmark, or did they send ingots of copper, of bronze, up to Denmark for further working into Bronze Age artifacts? But it's just a really remarkable story, and I'll show you where you can see some of these things later on. But it's something to be aware of there. Another characteristic of the barbarian world is this attention paid to various abstract decorative styles. The famous megalithic art that you see, for example, at Newgrange is one example. But then 3,000 years later, you have another fluorescence of these abstract decorative styles that you find in the Latin style seen on the Battersea Shield here. So very, very artistic sensibilities here in the barbarian world. Dairying and animal traction, animal economies, very, very important with domestic animals in the barbarian world. They're farmers. They're growing crops, cereals, wheat, barley, for the most part. But the importance of domestic animals can't be overstated. So, especially what archaeologists call secondary products, not meat, but milk and wool and animal traction. And here's two examples. These are the sieves that were mentioned earlier in the introduction of that we've been studying that contain milk lipid residues, which provide compelling evidence for the production of cheese 7,000 years ago. But then animal traction, which is a very underappreciated aspect of prehistoric life. The use of animals to pull wagons, plows, all sorts of things. These were labor multipliers for prehistoric households, and the combination of the wealth in animals created through animals used for these secondary products, such as traction, milk, and wool, and the durable goods that you have from metal artifacts, for example, provide tremendous opportunities for the generation of wealth and differentiation by wealth and perhaps eventually by status. Barbarians took risks, and it's very, very clear that they took risks. And this is the final piece in this animal traction, durable goods, wealth argument, and that is that certain barbarians did like to take risks. One example of this is Ötzi, the Iceman. Might not think about him taking a risk, but he's going somewhere. He's on a mission crossing the Alps when he got murdered. I really don't think he was fleeing someone. I don't think he was chased up there. That doesn't make a lot of sense. He was going somewhere and he got ambushed, and that was the end of him. But in any event, the idea that he would take a risk carrying all those different things that he has that were found alongside of him, and that's another aspect of being able to create wealth, because you can't have wealth without risk. And so let's see, he had kind of maybe even an entrepreneur of some sort, finding his way, going somewhere on a mission. And then as you get on later on in prehistory in the barbarian world, there are all sorts of other examples of people engaging in entrepreneurial, commercial behavior that involves some element of risk. There's also a dark side of the barbarian world that's shown by Ötzi, and that is that violence was endemic. Ötzi died from an arrow in his shoulder that caused him to bleed to death in the cold glacial environment up there in the mountains. So you have this interpersonal violence, and then later you have organized warfare, especially in southern Scandinavia. You see examples of this. You find war booty sacrifices, you find weapons, you find all sorts of other evidence of conflict, massacres, and the like. So, barbarians really could be barbaric at times, and so it's just a fact of life in the barbarian world. So those, I think, are a few key aspects of the barbarian world that I think you need to appreciate. And I'd like to just spend a few more minutes talking about three important sites that I think capture a number of these different characteristics. They're Biskupin in Poland, Hallstatt in Austria, and Corlea in Ireland. And why did I choose them? Well, they capture some of these different traits that I've been talking about here and illustrate them. They're a little bit off the beaten track, so they're not your Stonehenge where everybody goes and sees Stonehenge. They're off a beaten track. You can visit them and not get in trouble for trespassing. And I've actually been to them. So important thing you learn early on is never try to talk about a site that you haven't actually been to. And so I've actually visited these particular sites. So first one is Biskupin, which is in northern Poland. You can see here this dot. It's in these lowlands of northern Poland. And this is also the area where I do my research several thousand years earlier, but it's the same sort of environment. Lowlands shaped by the glacial activity there. And what you find, here's a postcard from the 1960s that shows the area around Biskupin consisting of a series of lakes and marshy areas. This is sort of the universal symbol for marshy spot on maps that you draw yourself. And so you can see that there's this whole necklace of lakes here, and that just keeps going in different directions there. And so in the early 1930s, a local school teacher was walking along the lakes in this marshy area here, and he noticed posts sticking out of the turf. And he had heard about the Swiss lake dwellings, the Neolithic sites in Switzerland found in the 19th century. And he thought maybe this was something similar. So he contacted the authorities, and eventually the word made its way to an archaeologist named Józef Kościewski, who at the University of Poznań. And here he is cast in bronze. You can sit and have a chat with him. And Kościewski organized an archaeological excavation that lasted until the outbreak of World War II, and then continued on after World War II. And so in the course of several excavation seasons, Kościewski uncovered this remarkable settlement whose timbers had been preserved by waterlogging. And eventually the outlines of some of the key elements start appearing. You see this rampart here that's composed of cribs, of timber compartments here that have been filled with earth and stone and the like. You see these streets here that are covered in timbers and other structures. And Krzyzewski realized that, you know, it'd be really great if he could get up high and see something, see this from above. And so he got the Polish army to lend him an observation balloon, and he attached a camera to it. I mean, today we'd use a drone. But this was pretty revolutionary 80 plus years ago to do this. And so he got a camera up high. You can see it's an old bellows type camera hung underneath the balloon. And it took some remarkable photographs of the entire settlement plan. And so you can see that rampart coming around here. And you can see these houses, and the houses in many cases form these rows and all line up, and they're kind of all connected together. You can see among them there were streets, again, timber paved streets. And you can see these hearths. These white splotches are stones, collections of stones that served as hearths. And so from this, they eventually reconstructed the form of the settlement. And this proved to be a great sensation. There was a model of it made for the Polish pavilion at the 1939 World's Fair. They had an article in Scientific American, all sorts of tremendous stuff. And then the excavations continued on after World War II. And the site's been reconstructed today, so you can go and visit it. You can see its situation on the lake side. You can see a reconstruction of that rampart there here in wood. A fanciful gatehouse has been added, and the stakes that are form of breakwater have been added there. You can still see some of the original timbers poking out there. It's kind of a nice place to visit and feel a little bit of connection to the barbarian world. The important thing about the timbers is that the dendrochronology, tree ring dating, established that over half of them were cut during the winter of 738, 737 BC. And so this is another aspect of these waterlogged sites, is that tree ring dating becomes really, really useful. And so about half of them were cut during that one winter. And then over the next decade or two, more were cut, presumably to repair or expand buildings that were already in existence. And so that actually was a surprise, because that dating is somewhat earlier, about almost a century earlier than had been indicated by the archaeology and by the early radiocarbon dates that they had from the site. So it's that was a very interesting development. So you can go to Biskupin today and check it out. But it exemplifies many features of this barbarian world that I've been trying to emphasize: great preservation, timber construction, a central place, obviously. There's evidence for animal traction, because in and among these houses there were wooden wagon wheels found. And the way the houses are constructed suggests that they didn't have much of a rigid hierarchy, which is another feature of the barbarian world that I didn't really touch on, but which rigid political hierarchy that may have been the case for much of the barbarian world. So you should go and check out Biskupin. But then you can also go south into the Alps in Hallstatt and Austria, which is near Salzburg, easy drive from Salzburg, and up in the mountains. And you come across this lovely village here on the shore of the lake. It's a very pretty town, but you need to be aware that it can be packed with tourists, because the last couple of years, because there's an internet rumor that Hallstatt was the model for the Norwegian village in the movie Frozen, even though that's 1,000 miles away in Norway. Somebody started this rumor. That's not true, but the tourists come and pack Hallstatt during the summer. So, but if you're interested in archaeology, you just have to let it go and go up the mountain behind Hallstatt, which leads you into this valley. And in the distance, there's an entrance to a salt mine. And this is the salt mine managers. And this is the sort of the offices of the salt mine. And the manager of the salt mine in the 19th century was a guy named Johann Georg Ramsauer, but who also realized that this valley is just chock full of archaeological materials. And it's a huge cemetery. Now it's estimated to contain about 1,500 graves, dating around 600 BC, or between 700 and 600 BC for the most part. So starting in 1846 and continuing for 17 years, Ramsauer's workers under his supervision excavated about 980 of the burials. And then over the years, more have been added. And recently, there have been a number of new excavations in this area that have excavated still more of the burials. The unfortunate thing is Ramsauer didn't keep much of the pottery and the bones, and he was interested in the goodies. And whereas now the excavations are paying attention to all different categories of finds, and lots of new information is coming out of them. The good thing is that he recorded each one of these burials. He engaged an artist named Isidor Engel, and Engel made these drawings of these burials. So you have skeletal burials, you have cremations with burnt bone, and you can see the locations of all the different artifacts very, very clearly illustrated here. And the artifacts are tremendously elaborate and indicate tremendous wealth. And here's a kind of an iconic one. This is a sword, an iron sword. You can see the iron blade of the sword here, but it's the hilt of a sword made out of elephant ivory. So African elephant ivory and amber inlays, and amber presumably from the Baltic coast. And so whoever made this had to be familiar with both these materials. They had to come together from, we're not really too sure where it was made, but the folks in this valley with whom it was buried managed to acquire it. But it displays a tremendous level of craft skill there. But why was all this rich stuff buried in this mountain valley? Well, they were rich because of salt. The mountain is just simply full of salt, and it's been mined since the Bronze Age and even earlier. This is a kind of a reconstruction of some of the salt mining activity. It probably is a year-round activity, because down there in the depths of the salt mine, it probably was just actually fairly comfortable during the alpine winter. There's evidence that whole families engaged in the salt mining, in which each different members playing different roles, and actually living underground for some periods of time. You'll notice in this picture a couple of interesting features. Here's one carrying a backpack here, and here's another one. And so the salt preserves things to a tremendous degree, and so lots and lots of artifacts have been found by modern mining in this salt mine. And one of the things is this backpack here. This is an actual backpack that was used to carry salt out of the mine, and you can see this stick here. And it was an ingenious system where the carrier of the backpack would get out of the mine, and they would grab a hold of the stick, which would go extend above the shoulder, and they would tip it over, and the backpack would spill out its contents. So they didn't even have to take the backpack off before they went back down into the mine. They would just tip it over one shoulder and dump out the salt. So amazing skill here in this. Finally, and so you have lots of different aspects here too. You have the mortuary ceremonialism going on in the burials, timber, salt preservation, supply, demand, trade, accumulation of wealth, all sorts of these different things. Finally, let's go over to Ireland. And this is the Corlea Trackway in central Ireland. And you can see it on the map. Dublin's over here, Galway's over here, Belfast is up here. And so what you have here is central Ireland. This is not the postcard Ireland. This is not the stone-walled fields, 40 shades of green, sheep everywhere. These are the peatlands of central Ireland. And peat is harvested. The harvesting for fuel is now being brought to an end in the interests of preserving the environment, but it's been cut away here and you can see the cuttings of the peat which have filled with water. This is peat. This is peat bog vegetation, decaying vegetation that has formed this blanket across these vast areas of central Ireland. But the thing is, it's anaerobic, and it preserves, it creates an anaerobic environment and an acidic environment, and it preserves all sorts of organic materials like wood and skin, hair. One thing it doesn't preserve well is bone, because it's so acidic. The bone dissolves often, and so sometimes when you find a bog body, as had been found in areas around here, it got everything except the bones, and so everything's all limp, and there's a lot of skin. Even the hairstyle is preserved, but oftentimes no bones. But now, barbarians have a very complex relationship with wetlands, as I've been trying to emphasize. They've often been regarded as sacred places. So you find deposits of pottery and metal tools, the bog bodies. So these Irish Midland bogs are interesting. I mean, first of all, they're obstacles to travel. So it's hard to get across them. You even have to go around them, or even then, that's a challenge. But then you also might have wanted to actually just get into the bog to be able to perform these various ritual activities. So for various reasons, they built these timber trackways. And a lot of them are known from these Irish bogs. And they're also found in northern Germany, Netherlands, and other places where you have peat bogs. And back in the 1980s rather, Barry Raftery of the University College Dublin spent a number of years studying the one that was found at Corlea. And this is what he found. This is a segment. He found a trackway in which you had oak planks that had been laid down. You can't really see them in this picture. This is the actual trackway in that visitor center there. They laid down birch trunks lengthwise, and then they put these oak planks over them crossways, and then they pegged them down, having cut holes in the ends with stakes along the length of it. So, and again, tree ring dating is huge, 148 to 147 BC. So in any event, that's that's a very precise dating, but it was only used for a few years, and then it just sort of sank into the bog, and bog came and covered it up, and that was the end of it. So it's very its purpose is a matter of some debate. Here's a reconstruction of it. You can see the visitor center in the background going out into the bog. So again, preservation, wetlands, mobility, craft skills, and all this had to be supported by these animal economies to provide the food for the people to eat. Finally, I want to show you a few places where you can visit the barbarians, get in touch with their artifacts. The National Museum in Copenhagen is a textbook of European prehistory. You can learn all about the barbarian world with one visit to the National Museum in Copenhagen, especially across Northern and Central Europe. The Natural History Museum in Vienna has the objects from Hallstatt, all the preserved stuff from the salt mine and the artifacts from the graves, and plays a similar role in terms of learning about Central European, and since it was formed during the Austro-Hungarian Empire, from Southeastern Europe. Tremendous collections there. The Irish gold work that you saw with the Gleninchine Gorget, that's in the Dublin National Museum of Ireland, and you can spend an afternoon there just surrounded by some of the iconic artifacts of Irish prehistory. And then finally, my personal favorite, the Archaeological Museum in Kraków, Poland, where I received my first introduction to the archaeology of Central Europe during a visit while I was a undergraduate at the University of Pennsylvania. And so this is where my study of the barbarian world began. And so it's on this note that I will end. Thanks very much for listening.
Well, that was absolutely amazing and a wonderful appetizer to your book. I hope everyone listening runs out. Oh, I should start my video and gets a copy. Zoom is not helping me with the copy of the book. But that was absolutely incredible.
Actually, let me recommend the Danish version, the Dutch version rather, De Barbaren, which has a lovely picture of the Trundholm sun chariot on the.
Oh, that you're showing right now. That is
on the cover there.
That's incredible. So we have so many questions. I'm going to try to pull some together. There are several people bringing up Göbekli Tepe in southern Turkey and saying, have you found any relationship between the culture in southern Turkey, or has that been looked at?
Yeah, well, Göbekli is an interesting site. I was originally somewhat skeptical of it. I've come around to being somewhat more convinced of its character, and at the moment, it's a very special and unusual site. There's no direct connection with the it's kind of far away, but there's no direct connection with the life in the barbarian world, except that you do have these hunter-gatherer societies across northern Europe. None of them really built something as remarkable as Göbekli Tepe with its monumental sculptures. You do have some really spectacular barbarian sites. There's one in central Sweden where they took the skulls from there and put them on sticks and stood them up in a row. Pretty remarkable wetland site up there. Lots of other signs of ritual behavior, but not the same sort of hunter-gatherer construction of monumental structures like you have at Göbekli. So I would have to put them in kind of a separate place from the world that I'm talking about here.
Okay, so the overarching similarity is that there is no written language, but is there any evidence of oral literature like the Homeric poems that have come down to us?
You in later prehistoric Western Europe, and where you get into the things like Irish sagas and clearly those that tradition started in prehistoric times, and so that gives you a window into later prehistoric oral traditions, since it didn't just start from scratch at the time that they start to be recorded. It's you can't really get too much further into the more distant prehistoric past, but it is possible to make some inferences from the oral traditions, early oral traditions of British Isles and southern Scandinavia in particular, to get a few centuries back into the lives. But again, these are sagas, these are myths, these are mythical characters. But it does give you some insight there. But there's not the same. And when you talk about writing, I mean, I think the main thing you learn from it's not so much the literary writing, but it's the ability to find letters and bills and economic documents and things like that. That gives you the structure of the society and the character of the individual people. So what you see, for example, in medieval Novgorod in Russia, where they're writing on birch bark, the soft interior birch bark with styluses, you get actual letters from people and financial documents and the like. That just doesn't exist in the pre-literate barbarian world.
Did the use of bronze, iron, etc., owe to the contact of peoples further east, or was this an independent development? Do we know?
That's a good question. Colin Renfrew argued for the sort of the independent emergence of metallurgy in southeastern Europe. You got to remember these folks were highly mobile, and so they were moving around all the time. So trying to pin down a particular place where it came from, where it originated, where it was invented is really very very difficult, because not only did you have the movement, sort of this entrepreneurial movement of people with metals, but also you had this kind of the prospection for metals, taking these skills all over the place. So for example, in southwestern Ireland, Mount Gabriel, I mean, this is the edge of the earth, but it was a thriving community. It's Mount Gabriel, just like the Hallstatt mountain is packed with salt, Mount Gabriel is packed with copper ore. And this is really the edge of the world, but it's a major hub of mining activity during the Bronze Age and other sites in southwestern Ireland as well. So people got around real fast, and so the actual spread of this knowledge, it's a little bit hard to pin down that a particular valley or something, or even region where you could say it actually started. In general, I think the innovation took place in Near East, Southeast Europe, across that area, but it's actually more important to see how it spread. Same with agriculture. It's more important to see how it spread than actually pin down a site or a region where it was actually discovered.
There are so many questions. We could be going on for months.
Yeah, I'm sorry I ran
will
over a
just-
little bit here, but
No, no, no. I was just going to say, for all of you, I've been lucky enough to read the book, and many of your questions are in fact answered in the book. So I strongly suggest you pick up a copy. And just want to close with saying that as a nonprofit, the AIA relies on the generosity of supporters like you to produce content like this. If you would like to support AIA initiatives like the Holton Authors Winners, we encourage you to donate using the number provided on the screen. And we so appreciate your support. And Dr. Bogucki, we so appreciate your time. This was wonderful. Love your book, love the lecture, and thank you. And to everyone else, have a wonderful rest of your day, whatever time of day it is. And we hope you will join us for the next one in a year when the next Holton winner is announced. Thank you again. Goodbye.
okay, thank you.